Hi, everyone. My name is Aditi. We are going to get started. Our fourth panelist, Shanique, who is a rock star, is unfortunately caught in traffic because traffic was a nightmare this morning. We do live in Boston. And she's coming all the way out here from Springfield, which is very impressive. And I heard that she was in Boston last night, too, for a Boston Foundation thing. So she is like all over the place in the best way. So we're going to give her some grace, but I also want to be respectful of all of your time. So we'll go ahead and lightly get started, and Shanique will slide in and steal the show more than likely when she arrives. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for the Lenny Zakim Fund's Bridge Builder event. This is our first Bridge Builder in about a year. The last one took place in May of last year, so we're really excited to host this event again. As I said, my name is Aditi. I use she or they pronouns. I am the Deputy Director at the Lenny Zakim Fund as of about 3 months, which is thrilling. And I want to just take a quick moment and thank the Barr Foundation for hosting us. Thanks, Rory. Shout out. Also, a huge thank you to our videographer, Jordan, and our sound tech, Kevin, in the back over there from Eternal Visuals, who will be capturing this event for posterity, is that the word? And finally, thank you all for being here today. Today's conversation, Embracing the Movement, Uplifting and Supporting Grassroots Organizing in an Election Year, is inspired by LZF's vision for a more just and equitable world where communities thrive because of the contributions and leadership of grassroots organizations and organizers. I hope that by the end of this event, you'll leave with an understanding about the state of grassroots organizing and movement building generally and in the nonprofit sector, also about what philanthropy can do to support this work, and what the implications are of this being a pretty major election year on the national scale. So we'll start our program today with a panel discussion. Then you all will have an opportunity to engage in some small group discussions at your table. So if you're sitting at a table by yourself, at that time, I encourage you to go and find another table, but I'll let you know when that is. And then we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. And we have this space until about 11:15, 11:30ish. So after the event, please feel welcome to stick around, network, and please and thank you, clear out all the snacks that I ordered because I do not want to take home leftovers. Great. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? Fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started by introducing our wonderful panelists, or rather allowing them to introduce themselves. So we'll start with you, Katura, if you could share your name, a little bit about your organization, and what brings you to this work.
Hello? Is this on? Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everyone. How you doing? My name is Katura Brewster. I currently am honored to serve as the executive director of a youth organization called I Have a Future. We are a statewide community of youth and allies working to build full youth employment and an end to youth criminalization through legislative advocacy, direct action, and transformational leadership development. I'm like, should I go down? Or I'll say more in a bit.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Trey Andre Carmel Valentine. My pronouns are he and they, so please use them interchangeably. I am the executive director of the Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition. We are the nation's oldest active trans advocacy organization. And our responsibility is to ensure that trans rights and our trans communities are secured here in Massachusetts while providing critical assistance to folks who are experiencing discrimination, oppression, and violence. And we do that in a multiple of ways. Yeah.
Wow. Good morning, everyone. It's so good to be here. My name is Gabriela Mora. I use she, her pronouns. I also go by Gabby. And I am the Vice President of Programs and Strategy at the Krupp Family Foundation. We are a private family foundation that's based in Boston. And our mission is to move resources towards people and community in order to build political, economic, and cultural power, especially for folks directly impacted by systems of oppression. I am delighted to be on this panel, especially from the perspective of a funder. And to Aditi's question about what brought me into this work is I have a lot of clarity. I have a lot of clarity about my role in movements for social and racial justice and what that looks like. And especially in the context of the role I currently serve in is moving resources. And so ensuring that the organizations, the leaders of communities, the frontline leaders have everything that they need to do the important work that Katora, Treyandre, and also Shanique, who will be here soon, that you'll hear about. So that's what brings me into this. That's what makes me excited, and also excited to be here too. Yeah.
Thanks, Gabby. Treyandre, if you both would answer that.
So what brings me to this work, I mean, initially is a lifetime of experiencing trauma. But what brought me specifically to my organization and the work that my organization does is that when I was transitioning early on in my transition back in 2006, I didn't know any other trans people. I didn't know any other trans people of color. I didn't know any trans people who were immigrants because I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. And so I didn't have community. And so I sought out, one was like, where are the trans people in Massachusetts? And sought out MTPC. And really, MTPC is what sort of launched my leadership. And to come back and serve as the executive director, to me, is like, there's no greater service because, I'm here to really serve my community and to ensure that trans and non-binary folks have the support, the skills, and the access to resources needed to really thrive and to envision a future that is inclusive and accountable, and one that is really bright and vibrant for trans and non-binary people here in Massachusetts.
Hi again. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different reasons why I'm like sustained through this work. A lot of that is just having to do with the level of investment that has been brought forward in my life. I'm a product of a lot of resiliency, wisdom, and creativity that's just even fostered in the space, the people in this room. And yeah, I started as a community organizer when I was a teenager, kind of wandering in a lot of different ways, searching for a sense of community, looking for a sense of purpose, but also feeling a grave sense of powerlessness. And so through this work, I was able to gain an intimate relationship with power by engaging with decision makers on a state level, increasing youth job opportunities, working alongside my friends, partners, and other youth-centered organizations. And so, yeah, I think like very early on, I was exposed to the potential of what power could look like when it's harnessed by and actualized by the folks who need it the most. And in my line of work, that centers Black and Brown young people. And so, yeah, today, what that work continues to look like is the ways in which we are being creative about alternative community strategies, and really making sure that we are putting our being really critical about the ways in which our communities have the ability to influence power, not only on a statewide capacity, but in our local contexts. So yeah.
Thank you all. I think one of the things that we definitely want to touch on, and Katura, you started talking about this a little bit already, but I think there's a lot of language around movement building and organizing and grassroots work that exists in this space, but not a whole lot of I don't know if the word is consensus or understanding necessarily of like what those things mean, both in the context of the work, but also to each individual, organization or movement or things like that. And so I'd love if you all could just speak a little bit to how do you define grassroots movement building, organizing? What do those terms mean to you? How do you define them, and how do they show up in your work? And Katura, we'll start back with you.
Yeah. So I'm really gonna speak to in my best the best that I can in the youth organizing ecology as a whole. And so I would say that organizing and movement work really looks like making sure that young people have a strong analysis. And so on the ground, that really looks like strong base building, and then plugging people into campaigns that allow them to develop through those campaigns. And so you know one of the things that we as Our Future exists to close the gap on or addresses the racial wealth gap and the overrepresentation of youth in the criminal justice system. There was a report recently that you have to work and make $60 an hour or over $100,000 a year just to live comfortably in the state of Massachusetts. And so for young people who also use their checks and experiences to support their families, I just think that in a lot of ways, our state continuously leaves young people behind. And so allowing young people to understand that dynamic in a deeper way, and then make decisions about the ways in which they want to influence those processes so that again, their stories and experiences are at the forefront of what alternatives can look like. Then we see the change we want to see. And so for us right now, we've taken a lot of time to think about what are the needs of our communities right now. We can't continue to do or live into a lot of the traditional ways of organizing if we want to really catalyze the kind of political disruption that's needed in this current moment. I mean, we are talking about being in a very critical election year, and just the level of agency that's needed right now is important. And so at I Have a Future, we've been forced to think really differently about what that means, how we are engaging not only locally in Dorchester, which is where we're based, but how that looks across the state. And so that has led us to solidarity economies. And we've been taking some time to really explore and learn in a deeper way about how our state process can really invest and expand solidarity economy networks in a way that allow our communities to be resourced and make decisions around how those resources are distributed. And so, again, to kind of put it in a short little summary, I mean, I think it's about being, being pushed in different ways so that the kinds of strategies that we implement actually meet the needs that need to be addressed. Yeah.
Thank you, Katura. Before Trey Andre and Gabby address that, Shanique, would you mind just introducing yourself and a little bit about what your organization does and what brings you to this work?
Yes,
Thank you.
it's on. Oh, okay. I'm like, I don't hear myself. Hi, everyone. Shanique Rodriguez, Executive Director of the Massachusetts Voter Table. Hi. The energy. Apologize for being here late. I'd driven from Western Mass at 6 a.m. and apparently anticipating half an hour traffic was not correct. It's an hour and a half. So here I am. I have arrived. But I am with the Massachusetts Voter Table, which is a statewide organization. We are a voting rights organization that's actually an affiliate of a national organization called State Voices. The reason why we're called a voter table is that we're a table that has many partners across the state that sit at it. So those are C3 nonprofit organization who are committed to voting rights and civic engagement work who sit at our table. So we're actually all over the state. We have about 45 plus partners that are part of our membership. Some of them have, Khadija is a part of our membership. I'm in so many places with so many of our partners, and I keep having to say, they're a partner. um, and so our whole goal as an organization is really to increase civic access with the anticipation to also increase engagement, specifically in BIPOC and low-income communities. And that is to help to get them engaged in a process that will then bring better resources, power, representation to those communities as well, as they're the most disenfranchised communities in our state. So that's a little bit about our organization and who I am, and I'm looking forward to just diving into our discussion later and some of these questions. So there's more from me, but I will hold.
Thank you, Shanique. Trey Andre, if you could speak to how you define grassroots movement building, organizing, all of that.
Absolutely. So for me, I would say that ensuring that there is a path forward for trans and non-binary people to access power, have access to political power, so that they can really be a part of the changes that we really want to see, right? So ensuring that there is, when we have bills to sign onto, making sure that they have access, that they have not only access to how to inform folks or provide testimony or written testimony or anything like that, but also to ensure that there is access to cultural power and economic power as well. Trans and non-binary folks, especially Black and brown folks, BIPOC folks, face some of the highest inequities when it comes to employment, when it comes to housing, when it comes to healthcare. So ensuring that there is a path to access and a path for advocacy for that. And you don't have to be an activist. You don't have to be out there on the streets. You don't have to be a lobbyist, but your voice matters. And ensuring that there are different avenues for folks so that they can share their stories, which ends up changing people's opinions, and then that impacts the movement, right? And unfortunately, the thing that, I don't know if it's unfortunate, because there is sort of like the two sides to it, whereas that allows you the space to share your experience, where folks have never had that space before, right? And so like they're being heard, and at the same time, what is being shared are things that are painful. And unfortunately, pain is what moves us to change. And so we also need to ensure that in sharing that pain, that there is support. Because what happens is people often profit off of pain, right? Capitalize off of pain. And we need to really sort of, I guess, decolonize the way that we have been approaching a lot of the strategies in our movement.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, we're just talking about how we are defining grassroots movement building, organizing, some of those words, phrases, concepts, because I think we use that language a lot. Many of us do, whether or not we're actually necessarily involved in that work. But there's not a common consensus always on what those things mean. So what does that mean to you, your organization, how it shows up in your work?
Sure. So in our organization, we talk a lot about base building. So I want to touch on something Trey Andre talked about, which is it doesn't necessarily have to be activists, lobbyists, et cetera, who are activating change. So when we think about movement building, movement leadership, it's about social change that leads to systemic changes, right? And so that requires collective action. It requires coalition of folks, and that requires everyone in this room. And I talked about this yesterday, for those of you who are at the Boston Foundation event yesterday, we talked about movement leadership. And it really isn't about the people who are sitting here, it's about all of us and how we are moving systemic change for the issues that matter most to our communities. And I talk about communities specifically because at the voter table, I talked about having these many different partners across the state. They're also regionally based and in communities working on different issues that impact those communities. There are a lot of issues that impact us culturally and as people, as humans across the state, but then there are those specific things that are just happening in your community, just happening in your region. If you live as far west as I, there are some places that are super rural. There are parts of Western Mass that don't have internet connection or broadband connection in the same way that 45 minutes to where I live in Springfield does. And that's an issue. But in order for us to build the change that we want to see, it requires all of us. It requires us having people who do organizing, right? Individuals who are looking to collectively gather volunteer power from everyday people and community to do things like Trey Andre said, sharing your stories, in order to help impact that movement growth, right? I think that we also have to understand that we are constantly doing movement building. We're constantly organizing our communities. We have not come to the place of utopia where everything is wonderful and we have all the things that we need to be successful in life. That continues to be an issue just entirely in the world, right? That doesn't just happen in America or just in Massachusetts. That's happening everywhere. So there's constantly iterations of history where you've seen whole movements that have made systemic changes. And then you've seen that we've come to a place now where history is repeating itself and things are going backwards, and you still need people to step up and step into their power. So I want to touch on some of the things that some of my colleagues have said about power as well. It's not one of the words to define, but when we talk about power, it's about your voice. It's about everyday people understanding through the movement that you get to take charge of your life. You get to ask for what you need, and you get to fight for what you need. No one can take that activism out of you. You know what you need best. You know what you need best for your children, for your families, for your communities, and you are the best people to stand on the forefront of any movement. And so that's what we try to give as organizers, as people in this work, to everyday people, to say, like, I'm not someone special. I was just like you, and then started to take this on. And I know that you can too. And together we can really move something. So that's sort of my way of defining that, and how our organization looks at that as well, and our partners at that table.
×2, no notes. I am so incredibly grateful to be on this panel, and I hope y'all feel as grateful as well to hear all of the offerings that these folks have presented, these leaders have presented. From my perspective and vantage point at the Krupp Family Foundation, and to Aditi's question of how is KFF thinking about community organizing and base building, is rather simply, we're looking to organizers and movement leaders for that direction. And there's also incredible leaders in this room in philanthropy, my colleagues as well, that I look to for that direction. It was very clear to me, KFF, when I joined the organization first as an independent consultant in 2017, 2018, we were working alone. The foundation was not in relationship, was not in community. We had great relationships with folks, but to be sure, but we weren't doing it in the kind of right relationship that we strive to be doing it now. And so what that looks like for KFF is being in right relationship with other movement funders, other funders who share this perspective that have been doing this work for a really long time. They have organized me, and then also movement leaders who have also been doing this work for a really long time. And so when I started this morning and shared, like, I have a lot of clarity about my work here, and that's to move resources, that feels the most true to me and to support this work. And so I've just loved, like, from the jump, like, we're talking about power, we're talking about community power building, we are talking about organizing grassroots organizations, frontline organizations, also allied organizations, organizations that are working in allyship, and in doing base building work, alongside frontline organizations. That's really important as well. That work's incredibly important too, to a vibrant ecosystem. I think the reality is this work is just widely under resourced. It's just widely under resourced. There's a lot about philanthropy that there is a misalignment in the values, as well as how those values are actually operationalized. And then just, the nature of philanthropy. I know and I understand, if this group is in community with the Lenny Zakem Fund, there's probably a perspective in this room about, capitalism and structures that have created philanthropy, and those structures in and of themselves make it very hard, for philanthropy to adequately and over the long term support this kind of work. And so what feels important to me from the funder perspective is to offer that analysis, and then also offer too that there are a lot of opportunities. And it takes a long time. I mentioned that I joined KFF in 2017, 2018. It's 2024. This year, we are really beginning to implement a strategy that is focused on directing resources to base building, to grassroots movement leaders, to movement infrastructure. Much of the work that Shanique and the Mass Voter Table are doing, they are holding a table, they're holding the infrastructure for movement in the Commonwealth. And then also organizations that are providing incredibly, very much like needed, but very high level, like, policy analysis and lawyering. And honestly, like, I'll just say, like, people are suing the shit out of the government and other folks. Like, that work needs to happen. And so that's our analysis and that's our perspective. And I think how we try and support this work, and then also be in relationship with the organizations and the folks that are leading.
Thank you, Gabby. Thank you all. I think there's so much there that's so rich. And one of the things that I am thinking about, so at the Lenny Zakem Fund, we define our work in supporting grassroots organizing as really just centering the individuals and the communities that are most proximate to the issues that they are working to address. These are the folks that are disproportionately affected by, systemic inequities, things like that, and that the organizations that we serve through our grant making and capacity building and leadership and organizational development work are really the folks that wouldn't otherwise have access to these kinds of resources, that are working in their communities. They are the ones who are directly affected by and experiencing these systemic inequities, and they're just looking to find a way to help their communities not just survive, but thrive. And doing that in collaboration with their friends, their families, other communities, things like that. And a couple of things that I think are coming to mind for me when I'm hearing all of you speak is the first element of grassroots movement building and organizing that really speaks to me is this quote, "A rising tide lifts all boats," is where we're really focusing on, starting at the roots, and then as you start at the roots, everything else kind of grows with it. So if you take that bottom-up approach, you will invariably capture anyone and everyone in that movement or vision for a thriving society and community. And then the other piece is one of my favorite quotes by a Buddhist monk, actually, Thich Nhat Hanh is his name. But it speaks, or the quote is, "The essence of patience is resilience." And I think that that is so important about movement building, is just staying patient and being resilient and taking comfort in and support from your communities, and just keep taking it, one step at a time, 1 second or 1 minute or 1 hour at a time. And that patience will, I promise you, win out in the long term, as long as we continue to work together and hold each other and bring ourselves forward. So thank you for that. That really was well explained. I'm curious, and Gabby, you spoke to this a little bit, but I'm curious about what you, as individuals, as organizations, as communities, are doing to meet the vision for the future. And maybe we can start with Trey Andre and then cycle through our sort of nonprofit leaders. And then Gabby, you and I at the end can take sort of the other angle, which is how can philanthropy and other stakeholders support this work. And as a caveat, Trey Andre, Shanique, and Katura, if you wouldn't mind also speaking to how can nonprofits generally step up to meet the vision for this work. So it's not just about movement building and organizing, right? It's about, there are so many organizations out there that are doing really good work, and there's a place for all of it. And what does that look like? Thank you.
Well, actually, can you repeat that again?
I'm sorry, I said a whole lot just now. The gist of it is, what are you or your organization or your community even doing to meet the vision for the future?
Well, first of all, it's for us to have a vision for the future, right? A lot of trans and non-binary folks, particularly BIPOC folks, don't necessarily see that there is a future for them, that there's a future for us. I feel like one of my jobs is to have that vision and to continue to have that hope that there is a future that is vibrant, that is, I've mentioned this before, that is inclusive, that there is accountability, and that there is a future where it is not power over, because that is currently where we are now. It's very much a power over, but there is a power to, a power for, a power with. And so I've just been hearing a lot in sort of like, philanthropy that that they've been using sort of their reaction to the murder of George Floyd as sort of like this is how we're showing up, right? This is how we are rising to meet the moment. But the moments pass. So it's not just about rising to meet the moment. It's rising to meet the movement and that vision for a future that, not gonna lie, folks on the right, are right-wing Christian nationalists, white supremacists. They have a vision for a future that does not include me or you or a lot of people in this room. And they are very well resourced. There is a plan, right? There is a strategy, and that is about pitting us against each other. And that happens in philanthropy when we are competing for resources. When we are now having to, because a foundation say we are only funding new and innovative programs, and that forces organizations to then create programs, new programs, even though the programs that we have are already working and impactful, and we have shown that, but now we have to create new programs, and then we have to fight for resources. And that is not the vision that MTPC, that we see for ourselves. I refuse to think that I am in competition with Katura. I refuse. And I refuse to play that game. And so I hope you all also join me in refusing to play that game. Yeah. I guess I will maybe just leave it at that.
Mic drop. I can take it. Okay, sister girl, I'll go. Thank you. Although I don't know if I want to follow that. I felt like words were said and nothing else needed to be said. When I think about how our, organization communities coming to meet the vision, I think part of that is what I see our partners do every day on the ground. And I'm just thinking about some of our partners in East Boston who spent the beginning of this year door knocking and phone banking to survey their community to ask what are the most pressing issues that you and your family are facing right now. Housing was one of those things, and affordability. And how they're using that to push legislation around rent control, affordable housing, minimum wage increase, is just a way that we've seen our partners on the ground really listen to community and use that as the driving piece for local and statewide policy work in order to put legislation in place to make systematic changes for people's lives. Thank you. Dan, I'm a fan of you. Dan is giving me the energy I need right now. And that I think is so important to replicate in philanthropy, right? Is the listening piece. Are you listening to organizations, to communities about what's really needed? It's not about the fads or what we see, or coming with an influx of dollars at a time of panic, and we need that, right? But the whole reason why we got here is because we had been under resourced this whole time, and then now something drastic has happened that has bubbled something we knew all along existed. We knew what was happening in Black communities and police brutality long before Black Lives Matter happened. What happened was technology caught up to what we all knew in our communities. I watched a friend get shot on my way to school outside of my community in high school, bullet in her leg, right? I know a sitting school committee member whose son was wrongfully attacked by police in our community. And so we all knew that was happening long before Black Lives Matter happened. And then Black Lives Matter happened, and that's when we wanted to support Black-owned businesses. That's when we wanted to support legislation that really looked at police conduct in communities. But that was always happening. Pandemic also brought to our attention how under-resourced some communities are when it comes to healthcare. And just healthcare in general, about how the workers in healthcare are treated, how difficult it is to access care, and how in a pandemic, we saw Black and brown communities not receive testing or vaccination at the same rate as other communities. We already knew we didn't have those things. But at a moment when our folks were dying was when our activists and our community members and our allies had to say, hello, how many of us have to die before you do something? And philanthropy answered. And now all my organization had pivoted, right, to do service work because that's where the money is at now. And that's what we need to do now. But now that's all we're funding. And now we're at a critical moment in civic engagement and democracy. And where's the democracy funding? And so it's only after we've lost an election do we think that democracy is at stake. But democracy has been at stake. Where have you been? You have not been listening. We need philanthropy to listen. We also need to understand that the people doing this work are often the people most impacted. I'm a Black immigrant, naturalized citizen of this country who live in a poor community, lived as middle income, had a parents who were once undocumented, and also ran a small business for 15 years. All of my stories show up in my work, and everything that I touch has an impact on my own life. But we're also not resourcing the movement leaders. We're also not talking about wellness and care. We didn't decide to fund that until the people who are at the front lines of pandemic work were also dying. And then we thought, oh, and then we saw movement leaders leave the movement work because they were so burnt out because they were working 80 hours a week. I spent last year during redistricting, when redistricting blew up in Boston, working 80 hours because that was moving so fast and community needed to know that your entire communities were being redistricted. And people needed to show up and government wasn't telling people. So here comes us to answer that call. But I also worked 80 hours. I was on a call till 11 o'clock at night while my father was in the hospital, driving my mother home from having watched my father, who's now in hospice care. So I want philanthropy to really meet the vision of community that they've listened to and not what they thought was sexy and new and the shiny new penny right now. Because we also need long-term investments, not one-time funding that we write 30-page grants and reports for us to get, not multi-year funding. So we're always nervous about how am I going to get that 20K again? And I'm just speaking from experience, where we're writing pages for what is not enough to pay a staff member who also needs housing and better wages from us that we can't provide because we can't even fundraise it. Because we can't even put out job descriptions that says you have a permanent job here for the next 3 years, because I don't know how I'm going to fund you for the next 3 years, but I still need you to apply because we still need help. So that's my TED Talk for today.
Didn't I say that when Shanique would come in, she'd steal the show? I said that at the beginning. Katura? Sure, we're just talking about what we are doing individually or as an organization to meet the vision for the future.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I've been nibbling on as I'm listening to my colleagues is like, how are we investing in the future? A lot of the times, the community knows exactly what to do, y'all, and the solutions are there. And I, at least, yeah, I would say we don't always take the time to listen or slow down enough so that we can incorporate bolder, riskier, newer experiments that we can then really just like that then catalyze the change that we're trying to see. For us, 15 years ago, that's when Ivy Future was formed, in the middle of the recession, when our state budget was threatening youth job opportunities across the board. And so we've worked for 15 years to really grow this budget. And at its highest point, it was at $28.3 million. That's over 7,000 jobs across the state, which is pretty cool, right? And also, in the last 2 years, the Healy administration has cut that budget in half. We also, over the course of this 15-year journey, raised a supplemental budget to increase even more job opportunities for young people and implement other pilot programs to support young adults. The list goes on. We're constantly pushing for new solutions, and the state decided to not listen to those things, right? And so I love what Treandre had mentioned about you need a vision. So we took some time and we said, all right, what's our strategic vision over the next 3 years so that we can really change this dynamic, so that we can take the time to implement these new strategies that our communities know will take us further than where we are at now. And that's what has led us to Solidarity Economy Networks. And we are on a power building journey. Right now, we are growing an identity with over 1,000 young people across the state in a youth assembly, where we're thinking about what is a power map to expand solidarity economy movements, and then put pressure on our legislature to also replicate those same endeavors and initiatives. So I think that, yes, to add on, I also want us to hold ourselves accountable about the ways in which we are deeply listening and utilizing the solutions that are available to us through our communities, and then investing in the talent that can make this possible. There's a lot of times where I'm the youngest person in spaces like these, and I'm around thousands of really gifted and talented young people that aren't being invested in. There aren't enough spaces, seats at the table, positions that actually nurture that talent that can then fuel how we are thinking about our strategies moving forward. And that is something that I am deeply invested in, which has led to my work with Trey Andre on the Black and Indigenous Resistance Fund, where we are ensuring that Black and Indigenous organizations continually are invested in, particularly nurturing their executive leadership and their supporting staff. And I would be remiss to not also shout out my strong but mighty team, Cameron Toulouse, who's here as our events and communications coordinator, and Ivor Future's founding director, Daniel Geptuk. So, it's all these pieces, all these elements are really necessary, but true investment looks like taking the time to pour in and implement. And you need to be brave and be bold to meet the moment that we're in.
Thank you, Katura. Just in the last couple minutes, Gabby, do you want to say anything about how philanthropy can step up?
I'll just dovetail a little bit with what Katora just said about taking the time. I want to acknowledge that there are so many conversations that I've been a part of in the last 4, 5, 6 years that I've worked in philanthropy, where funders have heard like, well, just fund communities and just fund leaders. And that actually takes an incredible amount of work for those funders to do within their institutions. And so for funders who are within institutions, I encourage you to hold on to that work and cultivate that work, because it can and it probably will take years. And what has been really important and instructive for the Krupp Family Foundation, and I so love that Trey Andre called this into the room when we're talking about right-wing movements, and we're talking about the movements that these folks are leading, is that KFF needed to develop its own internal perspective on that. And so what that meant was that for the board and for the organization, that we are acknowledging the harm and the violence that is coming from systems of oppression and from other oppressions on communities. And we're not, that's not what we want. That's not our vision of the future. That's not our vision of the future. And whether that's white Christian nationalism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, etc., racism. That is not our vision of the future. And that meant us organizing around that shared perspective. Also, too, understanding that in the United States and around the world, there is an incredibly long and rich tradition of organizing that has led to the most meaningful social change in this country. And so it was organizing, that led to the wins that we do have, whether they be in the civil rights movement, in the movement for gay marriage, in the movement for women to vote, all of those movements.
Workers' rights. Workers' rights.
Workers' rights, like the 8-hour work, the 40-hour work week, like labor rights, like all of these rights that we do have in this moment have come as the result of organizing. And so it's also like it was getting a little bit clear. It also meant getting a little bit clear about that rich tradition and that rich history. And so we were able to anchor on and honestly say, like, this is the vision we want. This is the future that we want. We want more of these rights for more folks. And so how are we thinking about resourcing it? And it took a lot. Like Shanique's been through the grant making process with KFF, and I'm always working to kind of tighten the screws and make that easier on organizations, but it requires an incredible amount of like internal work. And so, as we're wrapping up on discussion, I just want to offer for the funders in the room, like I am always so happy to share what KFF has done and what we have learned and what I've learned from funder leaders in this room, like Dan, Dan, Liza as well. These are folks that I think we have. There's a lot of shared knowledge. We do not need to reinvent wheels. There's a lot of incredible work, and so, but it does require that patience that you were speaking to, Aditi, and then also that time that is needed.
Thank you, Gabby. The thing that I will wrap this panel discussion up with is that there's a concept in white supremacy culture called one right way. And if you're not familiar with white supremacy culture, I would go to Google, look it up. It's a great article, and it speaks to a lot of the different elements that we don't even realize we're implementing into our very existence. But what's so important, and what I'm hearing from all four of you, is that there is no one right way to do this work. And in fact, the sooner we acknowledge that, the sooner we acknowledge and embrace the movement, no pun intended to the title for today, but as soon as we acknowledge that, we embrace that, and we uplift all the multitudes of perspectives and cultures and practices and traditions that are a part of this work, the sooner we can start moving forward in a meaningful way. So thank you to our panelists. I now want to turn it over to you all. We're going to take about 10 minutes for you all to engage with the folks sitting at your table. So again, if you're sitting by yourself at a table, maybe you find another table. And I would encourage you to introduce yourselves to one another, share maybe one takeaway from the panel discussion, and most importantly, work together to craft anywhere from 1 to 3 questions together as a table that then we can pose to the panel when we come back. So we're going to be here in our small groups until about 10:25, and then I will call you. I'll give you a 2-minute warning, and then I'll call you back at 10:25. Go ahead. All right. So I hope that you found your small group discussions to be fruitful. I hope that you were able to learn about one another, meet people that you maybe hadn't met before. And I think we have time for at least 2 questions, maybe even 3, depending on what the questions are. So we'll get started. If someone has a question, please raise your hand and I will bring the mic to you. All right, I see Joan, and then I'll come over to you, Dina. And if you wouldn't mind just stating your name, pronouns optional, and organization, that would be great.
Sure, I'm Jen Alacqua. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of the History Project, which is Boston's queer community archives. And my table, we talked a lot about funding, and we talked a lot about, like, if you are a small organization, how are you supposed to be able to get the funding that makes your work sustainable? But like when you're on the ground doing the work and you have 1 staff or no staff, and you're not a professional grant writer or a professional development person, how are you supposed to pay for the work when you're doing the work? And how are we supposed to be able to find foundations who are invitation only or who don't have a website and who, have values that align with what we're doing? But, what can we do to break that down? This is really a question for funders. But can we break that down? What can we do? Y'all want to buy us a building so we can organize together? Anyway. Thank you.
Gabby, do you want to take a stab at that briefly? Or any of our other panelists can share from your experience?
Do other panel? Do you want it?
I'm like, where do I start? I would say, so in the case where you're the only staff person and you're trying to figure out how to get the work that you do funded, or one, I think that if the work that you're doing is connected to your own liberation and the folks that you're working alongside of, that will be invested in. So you have to believe in that. I think that's the first piece. And then also that your partners also have relationships. So I think kind of doing some just deep research, honestly, on who your collaborating partners are getting funded by, and how through those relationships you can open up the conversation to just really let them know, a funder know where you're at. So, hey, we're in a resurgence period. We're in a process where I'm the only staff person, and I'm looking to expand my team so that I can do A, B, and C. And there are a lot of funders who are willing to kind of like be with you in those times. I think a lot of times, like in spite of like popular belief, depending on your funders, I can't speak for everyone, but the ones that Ivy Future has been fortunate to be connected with just really care about the long haul in a bunch of ways and understand that there are going to be periods where we don't have it all together, and that's okay too. The other thing I just wanted to offer is, yeah, I was just deep research, right? So for example, right now, I recently am like starting my fundraising plan for the year. I write all the grants for Ivy Future, and we've started to do a lot of individual donor work. Shout out to Rope. So we've been really been just figuring out the different ways that we can sustain our work beyond foundations, and some of that has looked like raising individual funds, but also it's like, all right, ex funder, I want you to get to know us, and so this may not be the time where we're ready to apply per se, but if we could just have a conversation so I can be on your radar, and then I might stalk you a little bit. I might go to an event that you're at, I might see who else you talk to so that I can get a sense of what are the things that a funder would be aligned with. And try to just open the door, open the access of possibility through that research and unpacking of sorts. So yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Can I just add one thing? Joan, I know the work that you do, right? Like archiving LGBTQ history. And I think that it's hard for funders to see the necessity of that, the necessity of our stories needing to exist long after we do. Because and so it could, I mean, could be about the type of work, right? Like with MTPC, folks didn't want to fund trans people. They didn't want to fund us, like doing political work at all. And now they're just like, they don't want to fund. Now they only want to fund services that we're providing and not necessarily our advocacy work. And so I think that it's harder because of the lane that we are in. And so it is what is actually going to move funders to actually see the importance, not only important, the absolute necessity of the work that you do. I don't have a good answer.
Yeah. Joan, what I can offer and what I thought of is like, you're absolutely right. Like, I just want to affirm that institutional philanthropy, you described how it works. You described a lot of how it works. KFF, even, we are an invitation only foundation, largely in part because it's me. So same. And that doesn't mean that it's okay or that it's equitable. And so I just like want to affirm that what you're experiencing is like 100% true. And if there are funders in this room that care about LGBTQ issues and the important documentation and narrative work that I have no doubt that this organization is doing, like, please introduce yourself.
Joan's sitting over there.
Yeah. And then the other point, like, I just want to elevate what Katora shared is I think oftentimes, like, we understand, and I serve on nonprofit boards, we understand like development and fundraising is like, we can only write grants and get grants. Like, that is one kind of way to develop and advance the organization, but there's a lot of different ways to do that. And there's a lot of folks in this room, like ROP, Liza got a shout out for the work that they do to help organizations develop bases of individual donors and contributors. And they're also working to organize funders and shift the field as well. So good work's happening. But I largely want to affirm that your experience is, like, no, funders are the worst.
Thanks, Gabby.
Period. Yes. No, you don't even have to say thank. It's like the least. It's like it's the least we can do.
I'm going to shift us to the next question.
Thank you, Aditi. I'm Dina Zakum here as part of the LZF board. So thanks for everyone coming, and it's been amazing learning from the panel. We were talking a lot about funding, and this is more for the grantee partners, but something when we're doing our grant cycles we wonder about too is how should funders get to know grantee partners well enough without burdening you with long applications or too many site visits?
Thank you.
I'll take that. I'll take it. I think that the time in which you ask for the meeting is always when we're about to reapply. Ask for the meeting before that. To just get to know you. What are some things coming up? I'm also naming things that we have incredible funders like KFF. I see Groundworks in the room. Folks that have really, so I started in late 2022. So I transitioned like right after an election cycle. I had the pleasure of having our previous ED, Beth Juan, do a lot of introductions for me. But at that point of introductions was where I got to have real conversations with folks and got to know Gabby for who she is as a person, how they envision their funding, and really built a relationship. So that's one thing. The other thing that I saw was, I mentioned I was at the Boston Foundation. The voter table is one of the grantees of their new long-term project. And the way that we got to be a part of that process was an interview. I did 2 rounds of interviewing where they just simply asked 3 questions. But the first part of it was about, I remember the first meeting, and it's not like I hadn't met the program officers before, but the first part of that meeting was to share a little bit about the project that they're going into and why they're doing long-term investment, nearly $500,000 over 3 years for individual organizations. They did that spiel, and then they said, I'm going to tell you my story about why we do this work and how I came into the Boston Foundation. And then I want you to share what brings you to this work. That is organizing 101, is we ask people, we share our story, and then invite them to share their story. The good funders are doing that, where I feel like if I'm in a pickle, if one of my partners don't have funding, I can call Hyams, I can call Gabby, I can call Matt at Groundworks and say like, hey, I need some support, I need some help. I don't see them as funders, I see them as partners who deeply care. And then I have folks who I only hear from when it's time to do a report, when it's time to report on the work, and then they want to sit down and go through every piece of what was in the proposal and how did you do this, how did you do that, and what do you think about the future, and I know nothing about you. And I'll tell you one thing about people doing grassroots work, we don't want to be working with people we don't know. I want to get to know you. I want a cafecito. I want to have coffee with you. I want to have lunch with you. I want to know how many kids you have. I want to know like why you built a family foundation. I want to understand you as a person because I'm working with people. And I'm a person, and I'm not just an object that you fund. Because I keep saying that we are showing up as our whole selves in this work. And for us, this is our lives. When I don't receive funding, that's somebody's life to me. That's my life to me. And I need funders to understand that you are in a very privileged position and a wonderful position to be in. But you have to understand that people are showing up with their whole family on their back, with a community on their back. And it's hard. And it just takes an hour just to ask me why I'm doing this, what I see in the future, what I'm worried about. And that's how you get to know someone. So that when you see words on a sheet of paper, you understand what's motivating that. You understand why they said it because you've already met them and you already know how they're coming to this work, how they're showing up.
I guess I mean, just well said, you know, like, yes, I resonate deeply. Well, I was just sitting here thinking, I feel like a lot of foundations can learn from the Lenny Zakin Fund and foundations like the Heinz Foundation. I'm just getting to know you, Gabby, but you know, sounds like the Crump Foundation is doing some great things. And just really like highlighting, I think the ways in which you all are actively creating an intimate relationship with like us. I think it's like a great model. And I I was sitting here thinking about like what is the root of that, and it's really about just elevating the organization where it's at. I think a lot of when I think about the Lenny Zakin Fund, yeah, I think it's like through this partnership that Iowa Future is able to access tools that's getting us to think really differently about individual donor work, right? And then I'm constantly getting announcements and opportunities to like plug that in. Or do like things like this where you know, it's not outside of my breadth of work where I'm happy to share what's going on in my organization in multiple ways. So yeah, I think there are models that exist that I think we should just amplify. And to Shanique's point, there's a lot of work to do along the way. So yeah.
And I would say for those of us who are funders in the room, or resource allocators, or however you want to define your role in philanthropy, it's not just about the grant, right? It's about, I mean, there's this concept in trust-based philanthropy, if you're familiar with that, which is this idea of support beyond the check. So what are other ways in which you can be supporting your grantee partner organizations outside of the grant cycle and outside of just disseminating the check or that ACH payment, you know, when you click the button and it goes whoosh. What are other ways you can show up? Asking, staying in conversation to where Katora, Treyandre, even Shanique can feel comfortable, like Shanique mentioned, and, you know, give me a call or shoot me an email and say, hey, we're doing this event and we're looking for sponsors. Do you know anybody? Leverage your networks, right? I mean, if we're gonna be while we are finding ways to disrupt or even dismantle the systems, we also have to acknowledge that there are ways in which we must work within them at the same time. It's not one or the other. It's not let's pause the work so that we can disrupt and dismantle. Unfortunately, that's just not the reality. It would be great if we could, you know, maybe that would lead to faster disruption. But in the meantime, let's stick to I know this person, I don't know if they'll fund you, but they might know people who would fund you, and just like grow that ripple effect, grow that network, invite people to events, et cetera, et cetera. I know that we at Lenny Zakin Fund, the names of our grantee partners are not far from our mouths when we are talking. So, and I would encourage other funders to do the same. We have time for one more question, if anyone has one, and if no one does, I do. So, you know. Amazing. My question is, you know, part of this title is uplifting and supporting grassroots organizing in an election year. It is 2024. We are facing down a major national election. What are we doing about it? And how can we collectively support that work?
You saw how everyone was like, let the voting rights lady speak. We are in a critical moment in democracy, and I've talked about the sort of slow burn that has brought us here. Voter apathy is real. We have, just in the state of Massachusetts, low voter turnout in BIPOC and low-income communities. That includes low-income white communities as well. We are seeing that there has been a lot of disinformation around elections, accessing the voting box, etc., that we've had to contend with on the doors and in conversations with folks. So in 2024, when we look at a presidential race and a statewide race, and we had people, talk about, well, Massachusetts doesn't have a big stake in how a presidential turnout look like. We're not sort of a battleground state. We're not a swing state. There are all these things that make us feel like, that doesn't matter, right? But when we say that, even at this level, right? Because I've been in spaces with funders or resource allocators who are putting their eye on battleground states and taking, even though they're Massachusetts based, and sort of taking their eye away from Massachusetts. While you are doing that, I want you to know that we have had, Boston Globe's article in the last statewide election in 2022 said that we had an increase in voter participation and turnout was around 60%. And then the voter table did the data and looked at our gateway cities, which is mostly BIPOC low-income communities, folks who make at 40K or less, which are some of our largest municipalities. Turnout was 20%. When I look at more affluential white communities, turnouts was 70%. So when we think about who's representing our communities in the State House, it's mostly white, affluential communities who have their representative who are now representing a majority of people who don't look like that, who don't have those same lived experiences, who are not from those similar communities, right? And we all should have representation. This is not to say that that's a bad thing. They got to elect who they want. And then we have our communities who did not get to elect the person of their choice and their representation, their representative. And that's persistently happening. Last year in a municipal election, we saw these same communities with 10, 17, less than 10% turnout, and some of those communities had mayoral races. We've seen right-wing politics show up in municipalities around local issues like the libraries. Worcester County is notoriously purple, and it's called purple because there are so many Republican districts around the city of Worcester that the only thing that makes Central Mass purple is Worcester. I'm telling you that from experience. It is just Worcester. Everywhere else, Republicans and right-wing rhetoric, I've seen a super PAC fund a candidate running for a city council at-large seat in the city of Worcester. Why is that happening? So if you think what's happening outside in battleground states isn't happening here, it's happening covertly. This is the testing place of how to do this well else places. Because if you can flip a Democratic state, if you can flip BIPOC communities, the largest voting bloc, then you can control everything. This is what's critical right now. And then you also have to think about the blowback of what happens after a national election. Whether we have a Republican or a Democrat or whomever, wherever the chips land, there will be blowback. When Trump didn't get elected, the rhetoric triggered 22 voting rights block legislation, right? And we are seeing the aftermath of everything that happened in that election cycle, right? We saw Roe fall. We're seeing more abortion bans than ever. I just listened to the news coming in here. Arizona is now trying to enact a law from the 1800s to ban abortion. Things we would not even have fathomed 8 years ago is possible now because of what happened in one administration for 4 years. And then how does that impact our grassroots organizers and our organizations? It means a dwindling of resources. It means that if we have a Republican presidential win, we might see that in turn, folks that are getting federal grants on doing housing justice work, gone. Environmental justice work, gone. Right? Let alone reproductive rights funding. Some of our reproductive rights health centers, like Planned Parenthood, receives federal grants that come into the state that are then allocated out to their health centers. But it's not just Planned Parenthood dollars. Those are the dollars for every clinic in small communities that are Black and brown that won't get funding. But they'll tell you that we're just stopping the Planned Parenthood dollars. So I just want you to think about how national rhetoric is impacting our communities, our organizing, and the more that that gets messy is the more folks want to opt out of the process because we're already fed up of not having enough, let alone to then be berated. It doesn't matter who we elect. Some of our communities continuously be left behind. I've talked to more independent voters who have switched their parties because no one's doing anything for us. But where we can make a difference is locally. Where we can make a difference is who's at it in our state house, right? Because we can control that. Who's in our city hall? We can control those things. But we don't have enough investment at that level either to do the work to build trust in community, to empower them, to bring back the first piece of what we talked about, movement building, to empower people to get out there and participate in democracy to change what the fabric of our nation looks like. We can do that in Massachusetts because when we win in Massachusetts, when we do that well, we are the poster child of how that looks like in other countries. The Fair Share Amendment, the millionaire's tax, I've been on a road show across the nation talking about how we did that here. Abortion rights, some of the legislation that we've passed, the ballot initiatives that we've seen in other states have copied Massachusetts. We were leading on environmental justice work and climate action work long before anyone was even talking about that. We were the leaders of that. So there's opportunity here, but there's also a reality that we are slowly looking like other parts of this country, and we need to address that now and consistently. Because the enemies are at our back. The people who do not believe in the things that we believe in this room are constantly working against us. As Katara said, they have an agenda. They have an agenda. They have a plan. They have a vision. And I need all of you to join us in having a plan and a vision that combats that. Here in Massachusetts, here in our little small towns, our communities, that's what we need.
Anyone else have anything they want to add to that?
I would love to just dovetail on Shanique, and what I so strongly heard is like we need to be playing a long game. And this was brought up during the panel as well, to Katora's points. Like we need to be in the long game. And what that looks like for KFF is that 6-figure multi-year grants to the voter table that looked like some organizing work with the members of the family and the board who share the perception that many do. Massachusetts is good. Everything's great. It is progressive. The values are positive. And you heard from Shanique why, that perception isn't exactly reality. And then it also looks like supporting the grassroots year round. So in addition to outside of these big presidential election years, this is like year in, year out work. And avoiding the boom and bust cycle. So what we also do outside of Massachusetts in priority states, and Beth, when she left the voter table, now organizes and runs the Healthy Democracy Fund at the Tides Foundation. They're moving resources to priority states across the country and doing that in a year-round way in and out of election cycles, so that we can build this community level this base power, so that we're equipped for all of the moments. And honestly, we're taking a play. In my mind, we're taking a page right out of the playbook of the folks of the right, where there is long-term sustained funding. Like we just got to be on that level. We need to be doing that work too.
Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, Shanique. I don't have much else to add after that. That was a phenomenal discussion. Thank you to our panelists again. Katora from I Have a Future, Trey Andre from Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition, Shanique from Massachusetts Voter Table, and Gabby from the Krupp Family Foundation. Thank you all. Thank you to our wonderful audience members for all of your scintillating questions, and I hope that your table discussions were also equally energizing and meaningful. You will all see on your tables, I'm going to stand up for this so you can all see me better. There's a massive QR code on your table. Please, I ask of you, scan it and fill out the survey. It's a 2-minute survey, super simple, and your feedback goes such a long way in helping me and helping LZF to plan similar events to this, other events, and just learn from this experience. If there's one thing that we're doing at LZF, it's learning, always. You'll also see these yellow slips of paper with the head, heart, and hands graphic on it. I did make that. It's fine. Graphic design is my passion. I do invite you to jot down your reflections from your session here. The head is one thing that you might be thinking. The heart is one thing that you might be feeling. And the hands are one thing that you might do as a result of this session or as you leave this session. Could even be like a connection that you follow up on, for example. Feel free to take these with you, fill them out, sit with the things that you've learned today. And if you feel comfortable sharing some of those reflections with me, there is a question in the survey. Is there anything else you'd like to share? You can drop that in there. Once again, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to the Bar Foundation for hosting us. Thank you to our sound and video team. And thank you to all of you for being here. Hang out, network, eat some more pastries, have some coffee, and take care.